Hello, brilliant and precious jewelry community. Today you get a wonderful tutorial about Octane for Blender. Alright, so first part, we need to learn how to install the Blender Octane Render Edition. And there are a couple of things that you need to know. So first, let's go to the internet and run an Octane for Blender search. And you're going to see Octane, Octane a bit everywhere. Why? Because Octane is the company responsible for Octane Render. So if we go to this link, by example, well, this one is old, so beware. You must download the proper software, and that is the Blender Octane Render Edition and the Octane Render Prime server. And to be able to download the up-to-date versions, that's through the Octane webpage. You cannot just go to the Blender.org, normal download Blender and install Blender and hope to install Octane. That doesn't work like this. That's why many people say, I just can't install it. Yes, I know, it's not so easy. So, Octane Render server and the Blender Octane Render Edition. That's what you need. And to do that, you need an Octane account. So you go there, you follow the steps, and you create your account. That will get you a free tier subscription, and that's important. It has some limitation, but it's free. It's the free Blender Octane Render Edition, and it's a subscription, but it is free. It has one limitation, you only can use one GPU for rendering. That's a bit sad, but well, it's free. So it's pretty good. It's a pretty good deal. Okay, so once you've made your Octane account, you will have access to the download links, all right? Okay, so here you're going to create your Octane account, and then you can sign in. All right, so now you have your Octane account, and you're ready to download. If you go to download, it's going to tell you your account is not licensed for any Octane Render products. Wow, that's not good news. Okay, but if I go to subscriptions, there it says I have an Octane Render Prime standalone subscription and an Octane Render Prime plugin license. All right, that's good news. So there, if I go to downloads, here we are. It says clearly Octane Render Prime free tier, application completed, because you must verify your email and all the steps. And here I can download the Octane Render Prime for Blender. So you need the Blender Octane Render Edition. That's what I said earlier. It's the Blender version that has Octane inside it already. So like I said, you must and only can download it from here. That's the official website. So it's not through the normal Blender.org website. You won't find Octane there. And it's not really an outside plugin. It's really a Blender version that has Octane Render inside it. All right. And then you also need to download the Octane Server Prime. That's a software for Octane to be able to run the render, because something you have to know also, Octane runs on the server side. From your computer, it sends the scene data to the server and makes the render on your computer, okay? So it does work through the internet, which is also something you must know. You need an internet connection all the time, which is also maybe not a good news for all of you. For me, it's okay because here in my office, I have a constant internet connection, and that's where I make my renders. so it's all right. It's actually very nice. But if you're on the move, etc., etc., working on a laptop, maybe you won't have a good internet connection, and yes, that might be a problem. But it's a free tier. Okay, so some limitations. Only works with one GPU, and you need an internet connection, a constant internet connection. Okay, so this is part 2 of today's tutorial. Part 1 was learning about Blender Octane Edition and how to install it. So now we are here. If we go to the render engine, we have then the Octane render turned on. So just one reminder, if I run the render preview now, like this, goes, nothing happens. Oh, a message is showing up, not connected, no render server at address, etc., etc. Why? Well, that's why we have the Octane server that must be running before running any rendering task on the Blender Octane Edition. So also, if anything crashed for any reason, by example, if you have the render preview running and you run the render and you crash the server, you obviously need to know that you need to close in the task manager the Octane server, you need to end the task, and then you need to rerun the Octane server. That's one of the way to deal with the crash of Octane rendering. So let's turn this off. Let's run the Octane server. Double click. Okay. Nothing happens, but obviously if we go to the task manager here and we take a look at the tasks, you are going to see the Octane server running. So that's just running the Octane server. You won't see any window unless there's a subscription or a license problem. And well, then you must write to Otoy and to find out why you have a license or subscription problem. It's sad, but it happens sometimes. Otherwise, nothing is going to show up. But now let's go back to Blender and let's make a render preview. Blender will be running completely as normal. All the menus, all the shortcuts you want to have, all add-ons you want to install. Now waiting for image, and they're calculating. Okay, so speed, you're going to get pretty confident that Octane has a really good speed. Here we have many gemstones. I have the glare effect turn on, I have depth of field turn on, I have bloom effect turn on, so that's a lot. And speed is all right. It's not faster than LuxScore, by example. It's not faster than Cycles, we could see, obviously, because Cycles and Cycle X. But as you know, Cycle X is not yet an option for us. And we're here with Octane because Octane is famous for many reasons. We have different options of rendering, and it's a path tracing engine, which is generally better for reflections, refractions, and dispersions effects. And that's what I like in Octane. We get a lot of realistic calculations and effects, and they're treated pretty well. We're going to talk about the dispersion because, well, in this scene, I did something very specific. All right, so we're going to go through the settings that we need to know to get this kind of render First, the kernel type, the normal one is the path tracing. All right. But for jewelry, we want to use the PMC kernel. It's famous for handling caustics and refractions and dispersion better. It's going to be slower, but if you want quality, it's going to be slower. Means more calculation. Okay, on the render properties tab, this is all we need to do. PMC kernel, higher max depth for diffuse, glossy, and scatter. Check that caustic blur is at 0 and GI clamp is at 1. Now, in the scene, I have a camera, an area light, the rings with the gemstones, the plane, which is the floor, which is the ground, and an empty that we're going to use for depth of field. So it's obviously a very simple setting, and we can see that the area light is very close to the ground. And obviously that is going to depend a lot on what environment you're using. So normally, when turning on Octane, you are going to have the daylight environment turn on, and we're going to use the texture environment. So turn it on, and then we'll have to set up the nodes for that environment. Okay, so that's the objects and some settings to get started. And now let's go to shading. Okay, so for the materials, this scene is pretty simple, in fact. The floor has a universal material. So beware if your scene comes from cycles, beware because your cycles materials are going to be turned on and present here in the shading tab in your material output. Because here we can choose what render engine is using this material. So beware, because if you already had, it happened to me many times, if you already had cycles material on your objects, it's going to get very messy and many things can go wrong. So check that you are creating new materials and that the material output is going to Octane, obviously. But that's something you need to know. Okay, then on the shader side, well, we have a long list of shaders, and that's very nice, in fact. They're all for Octane, so we have Octane nodes, and they work similarly to cycles. By examples, you can even recognize many names and things like that. But also at the beginning is going to be overwhelming because there are many nodes and there are many names you won't even know what it's all about. But for today we're going to go directly to the nodes we need for this scene, for this jewelry rendering. Okay, let's start with the ground. So the ground is using the all-purpose universal material. It's a huge material set that we get with that, but that's also why Octane is so attractive, because we can do a lot of things. Well, here the floor is just metallic at 1, specular 1, very low roughness because I'm going to use a bump map here, and the floor is a combination of an image, a marble texture, and a synthwave texture. The interesting part, we also get what the math node would be. Here we have a multiply texture. We can multiply this one by this one or that one with that one. So we don't have what would be a math node, but we have more specific nodes. In this case, I'm using the multiply text to combine these textures. So let's have a look at what these nodes make, because maybe you haven't watched or observed the render very closely, and especially the floor. So here you can see what the scene wave texture is doing, because the floor is, like I said, a mix of several texture on the normal node. Generally, we can work on the bump and normal, but here in Octane, they're separated. I prefer the way the normal node gets affected. Okay, so here, if I remove the scene wave texture, we won't have those small lines. I like them because, in fact, I wanted a kind of plastic pad as a floor. I wanted that floor to have some stains, but the main idea, in fact, was like a rubber pad plastic floor, like this one. So if I remove the marble texture and the image affecting the normal of the floor, it's set to have these lines. And in Octane, to affect the proportion of the mapping, we don't have a mapping node. We use, by example, the rotation node or the scale node, the scale transform, and the full transform, which has the translation, scale, and rotation. Translation is to move, to translate the texture, is to move a texture, all right? And that gets connected to the transform of the texture you want to affect. So this one has a rotation, and the scale is changed to get the waves to produce these lines, okay? So my first intention was just that dark plastic floor, and I was happy at first, but then I wanted something more interesting, and I wanted to add some stains to get a more interesting floor. You know, this is technically very clean. Many people like very clean renders for jewelry, but because I've been rendering jewelry for so long, I get bored very quickly with white floors or just one texture on the floor. So I vary a lot. I always try new ideas, new concept, even if some people won't like it. I don't care that much anymore. It must be fun for you. So here, by example, we can already see why Octane is attractive. We can see the caustics of the gemstones on the floor and some caustics of the ring here. They're very discreet, but they're here. And that's why I find Octane interesting and attractive, and it's really worth to learn. We are going to get high quality renders. Okay, but the caustics come from the settings I already showed on the render properties tab. Okay, now, so let's connect back the nodes. So the marble node and the image node are affecting the scene wave texture to get stains. So at the end, it does get a kind of rock look, like a stone look on the floor. But I like that strange mixing between the horizontal lines and the marble effect, giving the floor a very attractive final look. In fact, the setup is really simple, and that's what I like. I like to create very effective, simple sets and get very attractive effects. So now let's go have a look at the other materials, which is the white gold material and the diamond material. Actually, the diamond octane material is part of one of my assets. It's one of my very successful assets. So obviously this is a bit of self-promotion, but obviously my channel is starting to get a lot of supports, actually thanks to you all. I'm also working a lot to make very high quality assets, so you can get very attractive gemstones. In this case, So this is the Octane Render Procedural Color Gemstone collection. It's not very cheap, but I really worked a lot into creating this asset, and you are going to get the most famous gemstones. I even update my assets now and then, so this asset is very attractive. But this is not the point today. Yes, I'm going to show you how this diamond is set, and we're going to talk about some different aspects. Okay, so for the diamond, obviously you can run and buy my wonderful asset. Many people do. But anyway, we are here and I'm going to share how this diamond material is made. So we are using the universal material with octane calculation here. We use the IOR plus color. Transmission is obviously white. Metallic 0, specular 1, roughness 0, obviously. Now, the IOR, well, you can find a bit different numbers, maybe for diamond 242, 243. I like to use 2418, don't ask why. It's also in the refraction index range, because it's a range, because in nature refraction varies and it can vary a lot. So that's the number I like. Now down here we have the dispersion coefficient. So the official number is 0.044. That's what we're going to find in most of tables if you run a search. Okay, so for the white gold material, this time we're using the metal material, the metal shader, which is really nice. We're going to use RGB IOR. Here I'm using an image on the roughness. Here we can change the power. So it's set pretty low. Normally would be 1. But I just wanted a slight worn out effect on the metal, because it's always nice to have like some stains, like types of fingerprints or water drops, because when you wash jewels and you dry them, if you don't remove the small water droplets, you're always going to have some roughness stains because of the water. So this is what I use on the roughness node. Then we have some normal node, which is also a marble texture, very, very low here. Just a slight effect, a slight bump effect, because the metal in real life, even polished, well, polished is going to look absolutely like a mirror, but also it always has some bumps here and there. And here some great news in Octane. We have the round edge effect, the round edge node. So this one is connected to the round edge radius. And if we zoom in, we can see the effect. Don't care too much about the glare and bloom effect. They're turned on. For jewelry generally it's really good. We'll see later the settings for the camera. Okay, here we can see the rounded edges. They're working really well. So high number of samples. Radius, well, you need to test depending on your mesh what's the best number, because obviously if I put a higher radius, some artifacts are going to start showing up. So you must be careful with the round edge node. Okay, so basically that's it for the white gold material. The sheen here, well, does nothing because it's not even connected. Specular 1, and that's more than perfect for a white gold material. Okay, so in fact we've been through the entire node setup for the materials. We still have to have a look at the world, because here you can go to the object, but you can go also to the world. You can do the same in cycles, by the way. So this is the HDR. Here we have the famous transformation nodes. This is a rotation node on the HDR. Also there you must test a lot, because sometimes with just 1 degree of difference, it's totally another world. All right, you should know that by now if you're following my channel for some time, because that's the same in any render engine. Cycles, Eevee, LuxScore, whatever render engine you're using. So, well, obviously this is going to make a lot of difference on how the light, because it's changing the orientation of the HDR sphere. All right. And actually here, well, it's a wraparound, not the mirror distribution for the HDR. Here the power is pretty low. And also, well, I am using an artificial light. Always beware when using HDR and artificial lights, because most of the time artificial lights are going to affect the scene, but not in a good way. So it's really hard to balance HDR and artificial lights. Generally in Octane, you are going to prefer area lights. They're the best, and you should use area lights. So the light, like I said, is really wide. It's thin but very wide, and lights also gets, okay, actually let's go to the object. The light also gets nodes, which is very interesting. In this occasion, I'm not making any weird effects on the light material, but you can. In Octane, you can do that a lot. All right, so here you put a texture emission. You set the power, and texture should be a 1. Okay, and it's connected to the diffuse material on the emission node, obviously. Okay, so that's all there is in this scene, in this jewelry render, to make the floor, the diamonds, the gold material, the HDR environment, and an area light. We went through all the nodes, and well, this is quite amazing, isn't it? Look at this. Look at this beauty. Now, the last aspect we need to check is the camera settings. So let's go to the camera. Many things are similar to cycles. So at the beginning you're saying, I know these numbers, I know these values, all right, clipping, etc., etc. But then as you go down, oh man, there are many settings that you won't know nothing about, because these are Octane settings and there are many of them. So once again, it's going to be overwhelming and you're going to be like, oh my god, what's this? Okay, but let's see what we're using today. So, well, at first, nothing new, just the distance, the focal length, the clipping, that's depending on where you are putting the camera. And here, the depth of field. So I do have, like I said, an empty, which I call DOF, because it's easier to find it in the list. So it's not autofocus. The aperture is very high, and the rest is much normal. If I put the aperture at 1, we won't have any depth of field effect, because the object and the camera are very close. So this is not so easy to find. It depends a lot on the size of your scene and the distance between the camera and your point of focus. but here at 50, because I wanted that the brand, in this case my brand in the rings, the engraving in the rings, should be readable even with a slight depth of field effect, which is always welcome. Well, not always, but most of the time it's really welcome. Then we have the effects here, because you can make the vignetting effect. Actually, normally the vignetting effect is turned on. I put it to 0 because I prefer making the vignette effect in post composition, post production. Okay, here you can play. I play obviously with the exposure and the gamma. I think the default value is 1 and 1, which is normal, but I wanted a strong contrast, so you need to play with exposure and gamma to get very strong lights and very strong dark areas, and full white and full black. This is what you want, especially when you have diamonds and white gold or platinum. Okay, some other settings, even lower. The denoise effect is really good, so it's turned on. And here, really at the bottom side, we have the Octane processing, and here I am using the bloom effect and the glare power, which is really nice because on the glare we can play because it has a couple of settings. You can use the blur, the angle, and the ray counts. And obviously that's also always a source of problems. That's why many people prefer not to use the bloom and the glare effect. Generally also I do that in post-production or composition because if something goes wrong during the render with these effects, you can't remove them, which is sometimes a bad thing. This render on my hardware at 300 samples took, if I remember, I don't remember if it took 30 minutes or 1 hour. And that's something we need to talk about because obviously it's very long, and that's due to the PMC calculation, all the refraction, the ray tracing depth, and all of that. But if I wanted to make an animation, I would not use Octane to this point. It's very high quality for still renders, but it's slow. It's slow, but it's very high quality thanks to the accuracy of the ray tracing system of Octane. That's why Octane is famous. But for an animation, for a jewelry animation, okay, and I made the render at 4K. But nonetheless, 30 minutes per frame on a well, my build is powerful. So most renders took a couple of seconds or minutes maybe, but not 30 minutes. I would never, well, no, never say never. I could use a render farm because some render farms obviously work with Octane, I think. Don't take my word on that, no. But yes, it's too slow for animation. It's sad, it's a bit sad because the quality is amazing. Look at this dispersion, look at these caustics. We can see the gemstone caustics on the floor there still. But you might change and tweak a bit the settings to make it a bit faster. But at 4K, preserving the high quality, I don't think that you can take the render speed to a low enough number to make it really usable for an animation. And that is sad. We would need to tweak and reduce too many effects to make it fast enough for an animation. Okay. Okay, so now let's say we are ready with the setup. We're ready to render. So we must turn on the preview. you must go back to the gray solid view. Actually, Octane is going to warn you to turn the view off. Otherwise, it won't even render. In Cycles or LuxScore, it would render with the preview running, but Octane won't. All right, and if you run your render, you're going to find out that it does not look like your preview at all. And generally it's going to be dull and it's going to be dark. And you are going to be very sad. Like it happened to me, because it happens to all of us. Why? There is one setting that is responsible for this entire problem. I don't really understand why it's not a default setting. There's something you must turn on. Here in the camera options, and not even at the top, really, it's a setting that's low, and you are going to miss it if you don't know that it's there. You must turn on the Octane Camera Imager. And this is crazy because it's really hard to find in the forums or in the questions anywhere that you must turn on the Octane Camera Imager. So last year when I was first using Octane, I was very hyped because the hype around Octane is quite high. In fact, it's even very high because it's always Octane is amazing. Octane renders really high quality images and animations, etc., etc. So when you finally can use and run Octane with Blender, you're like a very happy child with a new toy, like you just receive an amazing gift. Octane for Blender, yeah, this is amazing, let's render amazing jewelry. All right, and you run the render, working on the nodes, on the setup, on the lights, on the HDR. You run the render and you just want to cry. You just want to go to a dark room, forget about the world, forget about Octane, forget you ever went through all of this, running, installing, finding, learning, making all the effort, and you run the render and it's so bad looking, and you are going to be so depressed and so sad that it's going to be very bad. But you must turn on the Octane Camera Imager. Actually, let's make a test. Let's turn it off. Okay, let's put the resolution at Full HD normal. All right, so we have the Octane Imager turned off. Let's run the render. So F12, as always, sending information to the server, and rendering starts. So when you look at this, right away you're going to first you're going to think, okay, it's just because it's the beginning of the calculation, it looks dark, doesn't really look like my wonderful contrasted lit, amazingly lit with HDRI, area light, caustics, floor, textures, white gold, diamond scene. But first you're going to think it must be because the sample number is very, very low. So let's wait. And you decide to wait. And you're going to wait 1 hour, 2 hours, till you suddenly and finally realize that this is not working. Octane is the worst render engine there is. And I know we've all been there, because let's go out of this nightmare quickly, very quickly. You must turn on the Octane Camera Imager on. You must turn it on. You want to see the difference? F12. Okay, sending to server. Oh, all right. And then suddenly your smile is going to come back on your face. Your confidence in Octane is going to be renewed. And now you're a believer. Thanks to me in this occasion. But, well, you are going to thank me a lot for this tutorial because, man, I've been through some bad days because of Octane. And I just gave up. I gave up a couple of weeks. Most people I know because I read, I read a lot of forums. I read a lot of social media. And I know because I read a lot of comments, a lot of opinions. That's why we're here also. Many people just give up on Octane. Well, first because most, they can't even install it as a free tier for Blender. Because yes, it's not straightforward. You just won't find how to install it right away. You won't find it on the Blender.org website for the downloads because it's not there. You must go to the Otoy webpage. You need to make a subscription, download the Blender Octane Edition, the server software for Octane, install both of them, make your subscription for the free tier, verify your email. So that's a lot of process just to install it. All right, and then you'll be very happy, thrilled, and all of that. You're going to run Blender Octane Edition, and your renders, they won't come out as a viewport. And nothing and nobody is going to tell you how it works, just because that's the way it goes. Good information is not easy to find. But that's also why I started the channel years ago. And that's also why the channel is growing, thanks to all of you. Because it's a lot of fun to run a channel because I get a lot of questions, reactions, emails, phone calls, comments. I have members supporting my channel. I have a lot of people buying my assets on the Blender market. So that's cool because that makes that's a nice way to support Blender, because from my assets a nice percentage goes to Blender. So it's a nice way to support Blender also. And that's great because many people are asking, and they're asking nice questions, really asking nice questions. And you can see that in this video. So here you can see that, well, it's pretty slow, and this is just at full HD. It's not in 4K. But we can see also that with the real life dispersion coefficient and refraction coefficients in the render I published on social media, I was very happy to put, let's say, the wrong numbers and see the results, see the reactions, and it worked. And in fact, now that I'm rendering, this version looks technically way better because the diamonds get the real numbers in this tutorial. So this is amazing. But now that I look back, because I know how the other render looks, still somehow I prefer the other render. It's technically not as accurate. It has a lot of coloration on the diamonds, but somehow it made the render more alive. This one is more correct. This one is more realistic. This one for a client or a product render would sell like this. But anyway, I prefer the other version. Okay. So let's cancel. So here, if you cancel the rendering before the end, it won't make the denoising, which is not cool. So if we want the denoising to take effect, lower the sample to reach the full sampling and run the denoising.